Check out this kitchen island. I'm going to show you how I built it. I start by chipping away at all of the bark at the sides. Now, I prefer to use the restorer, but sometimes the bark just doesn't come off. And that restorer, per the usual, comes in handy to get rid of the bark and make sure that the live edge areas are perfectly clean. And then the grinder reel comes in handy, again, cleaning out that bark in the little tiny cracks and crevices, again, with the hammer. This is the messiest process that I have in the shop. There's no real way to keep the dust down here. It's just get it on the floor, sweep it up, clean it away, wear a dust mask to keep yourself safe. Breaking down the slabs here to smaller size, actually to the length that they're going to be when this thing is all done. And then I mark the straight edge here, get a good solid measurement to make sure that straight edge, those two edges are perpendicular, using that carpenter square. Some more chopping on the sides to get it ready for the form and the pour. And a lot of what I do with my customers is just dialoguing back and forth as to what they want for the layout for their slabs. And that's why I'm ripping this one down straight to center with the Festool track saw. That's the estimated layout for the table. You'll see I am going to get it on the pour table. And then I'm going to dam up the edges so that the form just doesn't leak. We're going to use a ton of caulk. I'm going to use some nice boards on top with some blocks that have tie-back tape so they don't stick to the epoxy. And that's what I'm doing here, getting those boards up, holding them down nice and tight so it does not float. Now these clamps that I have are actually perfectly sized for the pour table, and the pour table itself has a nice strong sturdy board underneath it so that they can clamp right up onto it. Here's the caulk and the dams just on the edges of the table to make sure that the epoxy doesn't spew out the sides. And then I'm going to also caulk the sides and put up some more boards to keep those inclusion areas full of epoxy and so they don't leak on the floor as well. And sometimes, no matter how careful I am with damming up the sides with tons of caulk, it ends up leaking. Strategy is catch it on the bottom, pour it back in the top, time it so that when you go to sleep, you know when to set your alarm to pour it back in the top to make sure that it doesn't harden up before you get it back in. Mixing up the epoxy here. Specifically, I'm going to use 3 different colors. This is Epoxy Pearl, Epoxy Caribbean, and Epoxy Ocean pigments. I find that they have the best metallic pigments in the market, not just the best, but the best little storage containers for them, so they're easy to get out and use. Going to put it in the vacuum chamber to get the oxygen out of it. Prior to this pouring all of this epoxy. Now this thing took an absolute ton of epoxy, a little bit more than typical, and anytime I use more than 2 slabs, I need to do something special on the bottom of the table to prevent it from bowing and moving, and you're going to see that at the end of the video. But again, just continuing to fill up the different voids in the table. I store my TOT sled on the ceiling of my workshop. Why? Because the thing is gigantic and I wouldn't have any space for it otherwise. So I've got a pulley system and a hoist on the wall. Maybe one day I'll do a shop tour for y'all so you can see that set up there. We're cracking it off the form after it's all cured and ready to go. Pulling all those clamps off, pulling all those blocks off, all the boards off to the side that keep the epoxy inside of it. I love the sound that this makes, cracking it off the pour table. Now this is usually pretty tough by myself, so I've got a bunch of carts. I moved the pour table over. I've got the router sled set and ready to rock and roll, and This is where I get my workout, lifting and moving all those boards. Setting up my Festool OF2200 with my dust collection setup, specifically those mag port fittings that I have in my workshop. Now you're only seeing like 10 seconds of video on this part, but this takes a couple of hours, probably 5 hours on this table. All that debris that does come off to get it nice and perfectly level. Trimming up the edges here, and you'll also see I did fill some of the added voids in the table. I show that in some of my other videos. But using the track saw here to trim up the edges. Real nervous about the size of this table because it's a countertop, if you remember. And well, countertops need to be perfectly sized to fit in the exact right spot. And that's what we're doing here. Measure a bunch of times, not just measure twice, cut once, but measure a bunch of times and adjust the cut as appropriate. Then I get going with the sanders. Start with the RO 150, then I'm going to move to the ETS 150, and I take a long time to do this to get it nice and flat and perfect, and the perfect finish on it when it's all said and done. Usually listen to a really great podcast or maybe some awesome YouTube videos. To be able to lift this beast by myself, I use the hoist that I have attached to the ceiling rafters in my workshop, lifting it, turning it upside down. I'm going to secure this with some C-channel stabilizers. Noted that prevents it from bowing and twisting and morphing over time, specifically because this is a countertop. It's got to stay nice, smooth, and flat and level. So I flip it with the hoist, and then I get my routers going to start cutting the gaps for the C-channels. Use two different routers here. Now this one's a little bit undersized for this application. It's because I didn't have a collet, quarter-inch collet for the big one, but I had a quarter-inch bit, so I used a small one. Then I'm hogging this out so that those are recessed. Those have to be recessed into the table so that the countertop fits nice and flat on the table. Then I'm going to clean it off with mineral spirits. What that does is that opens up the pores in the table, in the wood, to accept the finish correctly, and it also just cleans off all the dust. So the finish doesn't get mixed with dust as it goes on the table itself. And this is actually the first time that I get to see what it really truly looks like, and that's always exciting. But then I go for the finish. This is General Finishes 2K Poly. Pretty much this stuff is the most durable finish I can possibly put on a table that does not show scratches. I could put an epoxy flood coat on this whole table, but that shows all of the scratches, each and every little bit of them. And we start to see the final color of the table, not just the wood, but the epoxy as well. Given a nice sanding here in between coats, end up doing 4 coats on this table, did a little bit extra. And I always, no matter what the final finish is, start with a gloss until the very last coat with the dulling agent in it. That keeps the finish as clear as possible, as transparent as possible, because the dulling agents actually have a little bit of opacity to them. And here it is in all of its glory. This is why I have kitchen envy right there. Those cabinets, that countertop. Now that you've made it to the end of the video, please hit subscribe and enable those notifications.